What is going on, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series. And today we're going to be talking about... I don't even know how to describe this game, okay? In what other game ever in the history of video games have you combined the gameplay of a 2D side-scroller, 2D platformer, 3D hack and slash, 3D platformer, Tron-esque driving game, and a dance party, also with epic boss battles? Can't name one, can you? Because really, this is the first time I think that they've really had this kind of a clusterfuck of content in one game. Now, this could be a good thing, and this could be a bad thing, and we're going to get into that, but the game is also based on a Jewish religious text. So now you really can't say how many games, I mean, how many religious video games have you ever played in your life? And we're talking about El-Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron. This game is actually based off of the Book of Enoch. Enoch is actually the main character, and the Book of Enoch is a Jewish religious text that supposedly, you know, in Jewish myth, was written by Enoch, who was Noah's great-grandfather. Now, if you don't know who Noah is, in the Old Testament of the Bible, yes, I know, you probably never thought that Hateful Truth was going to be about the Bible, did you? But in the Bible, Noah is the person who gets a message from God and says, Noah, build an ark and put 2 of every animal on the ark, because I'm going to flood the earth and kill all the bad people who have inhabited the earth. And basically we're starting over, which is why we need 2 of every animal to repopulate the planet. So this story is a story of supposedly Noah's great-grandfather, who was called upon to come to the earth and purify the earth of 7 fallen angels who came out of heaven and decided to live on earth, and because they're angels, so they have godlike powers. And so the people begin to worship them. The angels begin to manipulate the population of the planet. They start to make bastardized creatures and all kinds of crazy shit. Let's just put it that way. We don't want to get too heavy into the religion of it, because this is some heavy fucking shit, okay? But holy crap. The first question, before we even start to talk about anything in the game or the gameplay, is what possessed them to make a game about a obscure Jewish religious text? Like this, the Book of Enoch, which is really what this game should have been called, because it's really what it is. El-Shaddai means God Almighty, but really it's the story of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch is not even accepted as canon by the mainstream Jewish religion. In fact, I was reading up on Wikipedia right before I did this because I wanted to talk a little bit about it. I think only 2 Christian churches acknowledge the book, and only like the most staunch of old school Jewish religious, people even read the book anymore, or even regard it as a legitimate religious text. So why they suddenly chose to take this book and turn it into a game, I have not a clue, okay? There's just nothing about a religious Jewish text that really jumps out at me as a good video game material, okay? But that doesn't mean they didn't do a good job. So let's actually talk about the game now. So, what is El-Shaddai? It really starts out as a very trippy game, okay? The graphical design of this game is something that you'll probably have not seen before and won't see for a very long time. If I could compare it to anything, I'd have to compare it to things like Tron, to things like Okami, those kind of games where it's like some of the stages are like a paintbrush style to them, so it looks like you're actually going through a work of art. Other stages look just like Tron. You're an electronic part of the world, and everything around you is like cyberized, like you're on Cybertron with the Transformers. So it really is a combination of different visual styles. It doesn't really ever settle in on one. But it's weird, but it's interesting at the same time. I have to say, the graphical style of this game is probably the most original thing about it, and it's probably the thing that gives it the most points. Because, first of all, talking about the story of the game, it is not a literal translation of the Book of Enoch. It's a very loose translation that's changed a little bit to become a video game. And basically, the whole mission here is that Noah. Now even I'm confused with the Jewish religious figures. I should never look this up. Enoch, who's the main character of the game, is going through this tower trying to stop these 7 fallen angels and purify them and send them back to heaven where they belong. And So really, the story follows along his adventure of going through this tower, and he actually has someone who it's never even clear who this guy is. His name's Lucifer, and at first you're like, Lucifer, does this sound like Lucifer, like the devil? But apparently they're not the same person. It's a completely different person from heaven, and he is your guide, kind of. He stays with you during everything. He tells you what floor of the tower you're on, what angel to expect to run into on that floor of the tower. He also, oddly enough, calls God on his cell phone to give him updates on the status of your journey. That has to be one hell of a minutes plan to be able to call God on your cell phone. I mean, that's got to be a couple $100 a month, right? So, wow. It's crazy, the story of this game, and like they've really modernized it too. Obviously, you know, the Book of Enoch, they weren't talking on cell phones, so they really tried to take this obscure religious text and turn it into a modern flair, a modern story. And that really is the story of the game. And through the game, there's different characters. There's Ishtar, who's also like in Jewish religion, an ancient character who becomes a hero, and she's part of the story. But really, unfortunately, the thing that I think that is disappointing is that even though all this sounds super original, and it actually sounds like it could be interesting, you know, here's a guy with superpowers fighting angels, the story never really makes a lot of sense because they don't go into enough detail to explain exactly what's going on. There are some points where people get sucked down into darkness and all of a sudden they become super monster beasts, and you know, and you're like, why is that happening? What is the darkness? Who is this girl? What is this? What is that? And those answers are never given to you. And because of that, you kind of end up feeling a little bit empty when the game ends, and you're like, damn, you know, I feel like this could have been a really, really interesting hook of a story if they had fleshed it out more and were more explanatory with what was going on. But really what they give you is a bare bones story with a lot of things that just happen for the sake of happening to keep the story moving, and they never explain them, and I think they probably did it because they didn't want you to get too caught up in the religious text, you know, parent literature that really made the story of the game. They just wanted you to have like a fun time playing an action platformer game. Now let's really talk about the game, the gameplay of this game, okay? Because I think, unfortunately, the gameplay itself is where this game comes up very short. The combat of the game is reminiscent of Devil May Cry / God of War, where you get a weapon and now you have a certain combo that you can do with that weapon. You have a launcher attack, you can do an air combo, you can do a powered up special move, you can do a dodge move, and there's counter attacks that you can do, parries, all that's in the game, and it's pretty standard stuff for this kind of hack and slash action combat, okay? The game has 3 different weapons, and that's it. Only 3. And you can't always use all 3, like, for example, in God of War 3, where you had multiple weapons. Once you found them, you can use them in the whole game. That's not what this game is like. In this game, it's just you have to find the weapons on the fly during combat. And it's done in different ways. Sometimes you can beat up an enemy so much that you can steal his weapon, and now he's weaponless. Or sometimes there are actually orbs that float around, and when you hit the orb, it becomes a weapon. You can just grab the weapon out of thin air. And all the weapons are different. 2 of them are melee weapons. One of them is like a sword type weapon that's quick. One of them is a gloves type weapon, similar to like the gauntlets from God of War, where it's a slow attack, but it's very damaging. And then you've got a ranged weapon, which just like shoots missiles, okay? And the combat is so basic. I'm sorry, you know, I really tried to flesh out the combat. The most I ever got to here was do maybe 3 or 4 hits with the sword, then do a launcher, jump up 1, 2, 3, and then do a move to hit him back to the ground. And that's really where the combat ends. There are a couple other variations. There's after you kill enough enemies or do enough hits, you build up a rage meter, which I don't even know what it's really called in the game. I don't think they ever really told you what the name of it was. But once it's filled up, just like, for example, in God of War, you get a super attack. So you'll do it, and this guy called Uriel, who you really never understand who he is in the game, but yet after doing a little bit more research and reading the instruction manual, I found out he's one of these 4 archangels who still work for heaven, and they came with you to help you on your journey. So he shows up during your fight, and after you hit an enemy a certain amount of times, he'll hit them like from behind, which stuns them and allows you to continue your combo. Or you get a super powered attack that you can use to deplete that meter immediately. That is just a crazy, you know, multiple hit attack. And that's really it for combat. There's not a lot of stuff going for this game combat-wise. In the The one thing that I will say about the combat is it gets a little bit more original when you come to the boss fights. There are a lot of big boss battles in this game. I think really that's where the gameplay of this game shines the most, in the boss battles. Because every boss is a little bit different. You have to fight the angels themselves, who all have different abilities. And you have to figure out when you can hit them, how you can punish their attacks. You can't just, you know, mindlessly mash buttons and defeat them. You have to be smart about your combat. Then there are large-scale bosses, some of them that are gigantic, where it's very similar, again, to a God of War style boss battle, where you have to figure out when is your chance to attack this guy, how do you dodge his attacks, when is he vulnerable. And it's pretty standard fare. If you play God of War, you're going to understand the gameplay of the boss battles of this game. But I had a lot of fun fighting the bosses in this game. I really thought that is where the game shined the most, okay? The platforming. It sucks, okay? The platforming could have been done a lot better if they just allowed you to use camera controls. This game does not allow you in any way to move the camera. So for the 2D platforming parts, which there are several 2D stages of platforming, it's not so bad. You've played 2D games before. I mean, anyone who's played Super Mario Brothers is going to understand the concept of these 2D platforming stages and be able to beat them. Problem comes with the 3D elements. Most of the time when you're doing the platforming, the 3D camera is behind you, and so you can't judge the distance of how far you need to jump to get to the next platform. And the game tries to remedy this by giving you a little shadow circle that goes under your body, but a lot of the times it doesn't appear until the last second, and so you don't make the jump, or you over jump, and then when you're trying to correct your jump in midair, you end up falling into a bottomless pit. Now some parts, and this is where I was really confused, in some parts of this game, you can revive yourself, and you're fine. In combat, for most of the time, if you die in combat, if you mash buttons, you revive yourself. And you can do it, I think, up to 4 times in any one single battle. If you have to revive yourself the 5th time, that's it. You have to go back to a checkpoint that's been saved by the game. For the platforming elements, it seems like sometimes the game's very forgiving. Like, if they know this is a hard part of the platforming, you can endlessly fall into the pit over and over and over and over, and you just get infinite tries to try to beat the stage. But then in other parts, it seems like you don't. That every time you fall into the pit, you lose a piece of armor, and armor represents your life bar in this game. And then once you run out of armor, that's it. You have to go back to a checkpoint, which is probably a couple jumps back. And I'm really confused by this. I don't understand why some parts it works one way, why some parts it works another way. It's never really clear how much time you have to figure stuff out. And so a lot of the game I started just saying, I'm just going to just go for it on the first try, and I try to rush through it, and I die, and then you have to start, 5 minutes before. I'm like, fuck, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to replay a couple minutes of gameplay? I didn't know it was going to put me all the way back there. I thought I was going to get infinite retries here, and I didn't get them. So that's a little confusing. And the 3D platforming is very frustrating in this game. Unfortunately, that's about 50% of the gameplay of the game, which is kind of a letdown. The only other variety in this game of the gameplay is there is one stage that is a racing stage. Not really. It's really a on-rails racer where you're just going through a stage trying to fight enemies on the stage, and then there's like a boss you fight on this racing way, and it looks just like Tron. And really, it's just a button masher anyway. There's not too much you really need to learn to figure out how to beat this stage. For the most part, you just hang on to the edge of your seat and hold on to your pants and just drive right through it and try to survive, and you can get straight to the end of the stage. So it's nothing major, but it was interesting that they did put that stage in the game. I would have liked to maybe see 2 or 3 of those stages in the game with increasing levels of difficulty as you went along with them. I think that would have been better than just putting the one in there for the sake of variety. So I was a little bit confused about that. Now here's a weird thing. As you know, I read gaming magazines, and I've been reading different ones, and it seems like no one can agree on whether or not this is a good game. Game Informer gave this game a 9 out of 10. I believe IGN gave it a 5 out of 10, okay? So just think about this. That's basically saying, one guy's saying it's completely average, one guy's saying it's a really great game, it's almost perfect, okay? I'm going to tell you right now, this game is nowhere near a fucking 9. That guy from Game Informer has his head shoved firmly up his ass. There's no way on earth this game could be rated a 9, okay? The gameplay itself is very repetitive. The platforming is annoying in the 3D parts because you can't control the camera. The combat is very basic. I've played other games like God of War that have way more rewarding combat than this game has. And the bottom line is this: once you get about halfway through the game actually has 11 stages. So by the time you get to like stage 4 or 5, you will become bored because there's no longer any variety in enemy types. Again, I actually forgot to mention this. Enemies only have the same 3 kind of weapons that you can use. So you're either going to fight a guy with a ranged weapon, the sword, or the gloves. And that's it. There's no variety in how this game really plays outside of that. So once you see the basic 3 enemy types, you've seen the entire combat for the game outside of the boss fights. And it's really disappointing. You're like, why would they only have 3 enemy types in this game? There is one or two other enemy types that are just like floating objects. There's a floating fireball, and there's a fucking goose with a bag over its head. Don't ask me what the fuck that meant. Yeah, there's geese flying around trying to kill you with bags over their heads. That makes a lot of sense. But anyway, and those guys are just one-hit kills, and most of the time they only exist to annoy you during your platforming segments. They don't really come into play that much during the real combat of the game. So really the combat sucks. It's boring, it's repetitive. Once you learn like the best combo to use against an enemy, you're done. You know, 1 or 2 to 3 hits. If you have the sword, you do a launcher, or if you have the range attack, you do a launcher, and then you shoot them a couple more times. With the gloves, it's actually just like 4 hits, and then there's a charged hit you can do that leads into like a mini combo, and that's it. There's no other better strategies to use. It really gets repetitive and boring. So I thought they could have done a lot more with the combat to hook you, and they didn't. It was like they had this basic idea, and then they said, well, that's enough. We don't need to flesh out anymore. I mean, why weren't there more than 3 weapons in the whole game? That's kind of annoying, okay? And for a game that's about 8 hours long, it took me a little bit over 7 hours, I believe, to beat this game. You can't have 3 weapons. That's crazy. There should be more content to this game, okay? Maybe they felt that the platforming was enough to hook you, but no. In this day and age, just simple platforming is not enough to hook me. The only other real gameplay that I can even speak of, okay, before we get to a review score, is there are some hidden items. There's some hidden areas where you can go, where it's like kind of on a side path that you wouldn't have seen normally unless you were really looking for it. And you'll open up a portal to this place called the Darkness, and then all of a sudden the game becomes a pure 2D platformer yet again, where your goal is to jump up these ledges while this dark water almost is rising under you. If it touches you, you die instantly, and you have to start over. But your goal is to jump to the top and get to the top to survive. But there's also a hidden item called the Bone of Ishtar that's somewhere in this level, and you have to find it. What the fuck it does, I have no clue, because the game never explains to you what the point of finding the Bones of Ishtar is. It doesn't say if you get another item, if it changes the game, maybe it unlocks a new level. It never explains. And so after I found a couple of them, I started saying, fuck this, I don't care. If I don't know what this does, I don't give a shit what the item is supposed to be, and I don't even care about these levels anymore. And so by the end of the game, I was finding these hidden darkness parts of the levels, and I was like, I guess I'll go in there just to see if there's anything different. But there never was, and so it was pretty much a complete waste of my time. So that's all that there really is to El-Shaddai. And so no, there's no way this is a 9. With all the faults of the gameplay, it can't get a 9. The positives, if you like unique graphical design, if you like games, again, that look like Okami or a Tron or something like that, if you're really into the visuals of a game, this game will impress you. This is some of the most unique visuals I think I've seen in quite a long time. And it actually is almost a work of art in some places. It's just really beautiful the way that they've designed the game. And if you really want to watch a confusing but kind of interesting story, this might be what you're looking for. But if you're looking for a game with good gameplay, this isn't what you're looking for. The gameplay is basic, repetitive. You've done it all before in other games better, and it's really sad that that's what happened. The only place really that this game shines in the gameplay are the boss battles. And there are a lot of them, and that's a good thing, but I just wanted more out of this game. This game is not worth $60. I'll tell you that right now. This is not a $60 game. This should have been, if you really want my opinion, maybe a $40 game. If this were $40, I probably would be a little bit more lenient with my rating, but for a full $60 purchase, there's no way this is worth that much, okay? So, El-Shaddai, I'm looking at it and I'm like, you know, I would say it's not an average game. An average game, it would be if this game were what it is with the gameplay, but didn't have unique visuals. It didn't have an attempt at trying to taking a Jewish text and make it into an interesting story. And they do a decent job with both of those things. So I can't give it a rating like a 5, but I can't really give it more than average when I think about the gameplay. That gameplay is just so repetitive and average. So I'm going to give El-Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron, a 5.75. That's it. That's all I'm giving it. Because at the core, a game is a game. And if you don't like the gameplay of the game, then you can't like the game. No, regardless if this has the most gorgeous visuals ever seen, unless you're, I'm not buying a $60 beautiful movie. I'm buying a game. And even in games like Heavy Rain, which I rated very highly last year, yeah, sure, the gameplay was basic, but the gameplay was actually fun. You were using the D-pad to do different things. It was fun to try to press the quick time buttons at the right time, and you were at the edge of your seat with everything that was happening. The gameplay was riveting, and it really gripped you. The gameplay here outside of the boss battles sucks ass, and you will find yourself bored halfway through the game. And I was kind of happy to say, a lot of games I don't say this, but some games, they drag on, for 17, 18 hours, and that's a good thing. In this game, I'm glad this game ended at just over 7 hours, because I don't think I could have stomached any more of the repetitive combat and platforming. I think it was just enough that I didn't get mad at the game, but it was still boring while I was playing it. So, El-Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron, an interesting attempt at something unique. I think, again, a success in graphical design, and art design, whatever it's called for a game, a video game, but a failure when it comes to gameplay, and I can't just give a game a great score just because it's beautiful, so the game gets a 5.75. Definitely not a purchase. Maybe a good weekend rental if you just want to try something very weird and unique, but definitely not a purchase that I would recommend to anyone. So, alright, so that's it for the Hateful Truth game review for this time. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it was very informative. I'm DSP, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks.